So hello, welcome to How We Listen Live. So I'm going to do a little talk. I'm going to tell you a bit about myself, a bit about Byta, and then we could talk to Christine. So let's get going here. So part one, I do this same part every time. We talk a bit about Byta, byta.com, so you can get a context of who I am and why we're here. Then we talk about how we listen, which is the background to these events. The third point is I usually talk about a blog post that I've written over the last month. And I promised people I'd do that about a month and a half ago, and I've failed in that already. So for point three, I'll be apologizing instead of talking about anything new. And then part two is a conversation with Christine Osazuwa. Yeah. So to start, we just launched a massive redesign, byta.com, start of August. So feel free to take a look around. Jamie, who works with me, who lives in Southampton, he'll throw a couple links in the chat as we go here. But who am I? My name is Mark Brown, and I'm the founder and CEO of Byta. For you, those attuned to accents, I'm Canadian, not American. And I lived in the UK for years, and now I live in Sweden. And so my background, because I think it's important to talk about maybe how people started working in and around music. I started an artist-run label in Canada, and then I moved to the UK, and I worked at Creation, which is one of the UK's most important and legendary indie labels. And then I worked again at this label called Pop Tones, which was started by the guy who ran Creation. Then I started my own boutique radio promotion company, which I ran for 14 years. And when I was living in London, me along with two other people started Byta, platform for sending and receiving digital audio. And we've always been a distributed team, even from day one. And so when my co-founder was living in London, she said, I'm moving to Australia. And I said, oh, this is a nightmare. It's never going to work. How could people live in different places and run a company? Well, we know now that is the way things basically run everywhere. And once she moved to Australia, I thought, well, hey, I'm going to move to Sweden. So I now live in Stockholm, Sweden. So what is Byta? Byta is the platform that enables sending and receiving of digital audio in a clean, simple, and secure way, built for everyone working with music today. So why is Byta different, or what makes Byta unique? Is that we take advantage of audio files' unique properties. So we read and write file metadata. We allow file conversions on the fly. And we have fast yet secure streaming. There you go. Based on what I've talked about before and around sharing digital audio, if you were here, maybe I think it was last month or the month before, we actually did a massive survey because we're writing a white paper on digital audio sharing and the state of sharing files and streams. And so I've got a webinar next week hosted by Music Biz in the US to talk about the initial findings. So if you want to come join us, Jamie's going to throw a link in the chat. So Byta is about giving people the tools and the knowledge to move their careers forward, right? So how do we do that? Byta is a tool for sending and receiving digital audio. But we have this sort of sister company, nonprofit, which is called How We Listen. And that helps us to deliver people the knowledge to be successful. And so where does How We Listen come from? How We Listen comes from this interviews series that we started a handful of years ago, where we interview people. It's a weekly series on web text, where we interview people about how they discover, listen, and experience music. And the reason we started this is we got a bit frustrated that I think a lot of you will feel the same way, that if you maybe read in the press or online, you hear a lot of the time, oh, well, you know, the algorithm will sort everything out at Spotify. You know, it's easy to become successful or well-known because you just get some plays and that gets you more plays and everything goes great. And having a lot of experience in the music business, the music ecosystem like we do, we knew that wasn't true. And we also knew that this idea that you get on the top of a popular playlist, that isn't the key to success. The reason I mentioned Rap Caviar is I believe that's still the largest playlist on Spotify. And so it helps you to move forward, but it's not the solution. So what we were thinking is that basically we need to help people understand what they can do to move their careers forward, be it as an artist or as a manager or working at a label. And so I'm going to give you a couple examples of interviews and quotes. And this is my favorite. This is from an older one. And this will make sense in a second because I'm going to talk about Amber in a minute. But Amber's saying here, what you're doing is you're looking at a spreadsheet of words, no branding, no images, no story. And Amber is actually talking about Spotify. So what she's saying is the way I read it, is that it's easy to sort of get your music up on streaming platforms, but there's no context around who you are as an artist or as a band. And so what you need to be doing is you need to be thinking, how am I creating the world and the environment around me, and not relying on the platforms to do this for you. And so here's another one. This is from Severin, who lives in London. And this just backs up what I was saying, that she's saying, me and my friends usually compare new music via Instagram and secret links, and often go see acts in the flesh to get a bigger picture. So you can see again that she's not saying, oh, I just sit at home and listen to whatever the algorithm tells me to listen to. The way we find out about new music is way more nuanced. And then finally, Shell, she's a radio producer in the UK. And she sort of talks about something that is quite common for people who work with music because they receive audio a lot of the time. And she's just explaining her frustrations of being sent so much music and not being able to keep up with it. So again, no matter who you are, no matter what you do in the music ecosystem, it's always a challenge to figure out and to keep on top of everything you're listening to and all the sources you have for finding music. It's way more nuanced. So then what is How We Listen Live? Well, we thought it would be interesting to do an event where we could get someone on who we like, who we think is interesting, who we feel is doing something maybe different or insightful, and we have a longer conversation to really get a feel for how they got to where they are and what advice they have for other people in whatever area of expertise they have. And so what we like to do is we like to get a couple partners to help. And so this month is Measure of Music, and I'm going to let Christine explain all about that later. But the other partner is the Feature Artist Coalition, who are a nonprofit organization serving a diverse global membership of creators at all stages of their career, and they're based in the UK. And I did a great interview with them in advance of this, so maybe Jamie, if you want to throw that in the chat so everybody can have a read. Super important. All the people who work on putting this event together and all the guests, no one takes any sort of fee or anything. But what we do is we give some money every month for every event we do to Maytree, which is a house for people who are feeling suicidal. It's in London. It's super important to me. Maybe Jamie, throw the link in the chat as well. Take a look. If you ever have any extra money, it's, mental health and suicide awareness. I think it's super important. So I just wanted to highlight that. Again, this is normally where I talk about how I've written a blog post about something interesting that I've been thinking about over the month, but I admit I have not done that. I've been busy with other things. So we'll hop over that in embarrassment. A couple more small things. We've got a How We Listen Facebook group where we post things relevant to how we listen, including when videos like this are up on YouTube. They come a little later. We post links to the audio afterwards. So Jamie will throw the link in the chat if anybody wants to jump in. Then YouTube channel, we've started putting those up. Hopefully we'll let you all know when this one's up, but you'll get an audio link right after, I believe, in next few days. And here we are, back to the next event. Amber, who gave that great quote about Spotify, is going to be our next guest. And this one, she's back in Australia at the moment. She was living in the LA, so I don't know what time this is going to be. Thank God Christine is only an hour behind me. But I think I'm doing this one with Amber at like 1 in the morning or something. So for anybody who's in Australia, the timing is perfect for you this time. And any questions, you want to screenshot that, or maybe Jamie, throw those links in the chat. Anybody want to get a hold of me, hit me up on LinkedIn, Insta, wherever. If you have any questions, let me know. Any comments, happy to help. Let's see what's going on here. So Christine, are you available? There you are.
I am. Hello.
Oh, hello. Let me pin you. There you go. How's it going?
Oh, great. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for joining me. This is awesome.
Of course. No problem.
So I think people will probably know who you are since they signed up and would have done a little research. But do you want to, how about we do this? Why don't we summarize who you are and what you do to start?
Yeah, so I'm Christine Osazuwa. Despite the accent, I am based in London. I grew up in the States, Baltimore to be exact. Currently, I am the director for data and insights for Warner Music Group on the global marketing team. I also run a conference / workshop / hackathon called Measure of Music, and I regularly speak at lovely events like this one. And I'm an advisor to several startups in the music and entertainment space as well. Yeah. That sums up pretty quick, right?
Yeah. I didn't know about the advice thing. Okay, cool. So because I lived in London for 18 years, can you sort of go through how you started in music and then how you ended up where you are now?
Yeah. So that's a bit longer of a story, but I'll sum it up. So essentially, I have always wanted to work in music since I was young enough to understand that the music industry existed. I wanted to work in music. Essentially, I remember watching the VMAs and the Grammys, and people would get on stage and they would thank people, and I was like, "Who are those people they are thanking? I want to be one of those thanked people." And so I always had the idea of the music industry. Basically, I wanted to do that. Started booking shows when I was pretty young. Booked my first show when I was 15. It was for my 16th birthday party. The headlining band was All Time Low. They're from my hometown. It's not nearly as impressive then as it is now, but yes.
That's still impressive, though. That is.
They're only impressive. 2 years older than me, so they were 18-year-old boys this time. This is not. It sounds like very impressive. It was not at the time. It was in a church basement, but it was my 16th birthday. I ran street teams for artists. This was back in the Stone Age with MySpace. So I also learned to code when I was 14, basically. Built a lot of MySpace pages out for artists, for companies, things like that. Got really into digital marketing. So I love that space. The first full-time job I had was in a startup that did live music. And before that, while I was in undergrad, I did a lot of other things, radio stations. I worked as a contractor for Atlantic Records for some time, worked on Warped Tour for a bit. I did basically anything one could do in music. What
did you do on the Warped Tour?
I was the assistant to the press coordinator on Warped Tour. It was very unofficial, but everything when it comes to most punk rock music festivals are pretty unofficial.
Did you get to tour? Did you get to tour around?
East Coast.
Oh, that's awesome.
Good amount of the East Coast was super fun. Had a blast, obviously. Running around at like 19 years old and such. So I did that for a while. My undergraduate degree was in music business and journalism. The school I went to actually did not have that as a major, so I also created my own major in order to say that was my major. Did all of that, did my MBA in marketing, worked at my only job not in music. I worked for the university I graduated from for 3 years after I finished working at the startup. left
What
the
job?
States.
What job was that? Your non-music job?
Yeah, I worked at the university I graduated from. So literally my undergrad university, I worked as digital strategy. So digital
Oh, okay.
marketing, web development. I really wanted to hone in on my marketing skills at the time and my tech skills as well. So I did that basically. And I did my master's in data science while I was there, and they paid for it, which was lovely of them. Did a few boot camps as
Wow.
well. So I learned Python and SQL. And I learned R while I was doing my data science master's degree, basically. So if you're keeping count, I have 3 degrees, and I'm somehow not a doctor to my Nigerian parents' dismay. But here we are. Then I left the States in 2017. Essentially, Donald Trump won the election. I said, oh no. And then we were like, time to go somewhere else. And so I called my cousin. He lived in Stockholm. He's Nigerian. I'm Nigerian, but he grew up there. He married a Swedish girl. They have very cute children. So I called him up. I said, what's it like? He said, it's pretty cool. I said, great. It's literally cold. Didn't think about that part. But I moved to Stockholm. It took a while to get a job, unfortunately, but I did get one. Got a job at Universal, working as a data analyst there. Comes in handy that I had a master's degree in data science when you move across the world. Worked there for almost 2 years, got tired of being cold and eating fish, so I moved to London. Now I have a rule that I shouldn't live anywhere not in close proximity to plantains. It's a really good rule. It works for a lot of countries, actually, if you think about it. And so I started working at Warner when I moved to London, which was super fun. Started on the chief data officer's team, didn't really love that, moved to the chief marketing officer's team, which is the team I'm on now. And we are the team that decides the global priorities for Warner Music Group as a whole, which is very cool. So of course, our superstar artists like Dua Lipa, Ed Sheeran, Bruno Mars, Cardi B, etc. But even more exciting are developing and emerging artists, especially outside the US and the UK, like Burna Boy from Nigeria, Anita from Brazil, Ashniko from all over really, are all kind of artists that we're working with on an everyday basis, and I handle the data strategy. That was a very succinct story of how I got to where I am now.
That was fast. I'm tired. So one of the things that I've been noticing, I only noticed it recently, but like I saw on LinkedIn, you're always posting jobs, like a summary, which I think is pretty cool because like you basically given a summary of, I don't know, like what, like 10 years maybe of work, and it sounds
that's 10 years, yeah.
But it always sounds so easy in hindsight. Do you know what I mean? Like you look back and you go, oh, I did this and then I did this, and then and I can imagine what it was like because I live in Stockholm, so I can imagine what it's like. You move to Sweden, and it's difficult getting things going, and I think that's why I think it's cool that you post these lists of interesting jobs. And I was just sort of curious, like how did you start doing that? Did you just start seeing them around and think, oh, maybe I should amplify this if I can? Or
yeah, so I actually saw someone else do it first. I actually shouted them out in the first post, and I am completely blanking on who it was anymore. So I probably should have looked it up before I started this conversation, but here we are. But yeah, I saw someone else do it, and I was like, oh, that's a really cool idea. His was more focused on like tech, and tech is a space that I love, but I knew that, obviously music is an area I'm really passionate about. So the roles I post about are usually music, tech, media kind of related. And I started it for a few different reasons. One, I started during the height of the pandemic because a whole lot of people lost their jobs, especially people in live space. And so I was like, okay, well, how can I help all of these people in some way? My job was thankfully quite secure because streaming is quite pretty secure. So I was like, okay, I want to help somehow. This is a good way to be able to help. And so I started kind of piecing these all together because I was like, these jobs are really cool. And especially because sometimes you'll see a post and like it'll be a very cool job and there'll be like 3 likes on it. And I was like, oh, if people knew about this job, they would be all over this job. And I think a lot of times, especially in the music industry, everyone says, who you know? And like sometimes it's who you know, but sometimes it's still like being in the right place, virtual or otherwise, at the right time, essentially. So I've definitely seen job postings for someone that's like, hey, I'm looking for someone that has some marketing experience. Does anyone know anyone? And that'll be the entire post. And I'm like, what? Like, how do you search for that? Like, terrible SEO. They definitely need a marketing person. But like, there's no way to actually search for that. So you wouldn't know unless you knew. And so I really just like wanted to highlight a lot of those roles that hadn't been put on LinkedIn yet, in terms of like an actual proper like job description up, or that or on the company websites. It was a way to just like highlight like that there are jobs out there. Even like throughout all of the pandemic, I think I always had a really consistent amount of jobs to be able to post, which was I think motivational for a lot of people that were struggling at the time, definitely.
Like, so when you look back over getting into music, like what you're saying about promoting that first gig and stuff, it sounds like you're the kind of person who's like, I just want to do this, irrespective of what happens. Like, this is something I want to do and I'm going to do it. But what do you think are the big things that sort of made it possible for you to end up where you are now? Because I wrote this blog post called Here and There ages ago, and I talk about this idea that like as an artist or someone, you're here wherever you are and you're thinking about there, and there is different for everybody, right? So how do you think you got from sort of where you started to where you are now? Are there things that really worked for you, or did you think you right place at the right time, or all those things mixed in together?
Oh gosh, I feel like I was never in the right place at the right time. So I wouldn't say I wouldn't say that was the answer, unfortunately. I think it was a lot just like a will to do it. Like I mentioned, I'm from Baltimore. Baltimore is a very cool city, but it is not explicitly a music city. I spent a lot of time in New York. It's a 3.5 hour train ride, for example, and things like that. But I literally found any possible opportunity to do anything related to music at any time. I knew anyone working in music in Baltimore. I knew those people essentially. And then when I moved to Stockholm, it was the same. Anyone working in music in Stockholm, I knew of them or I knew them basically, even before I got a job, because I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. This is the most important thing. How can I do it? It's kind of like basically, if nothing else is as important as this, then nothing else really matters. So I always tell people my top priorities are my husband and my job. So priority number one is literally don't get divorced. And then after that is pretty much just work. And so I'm not saying this is a good, like, I don't think this is the greatest way to prioritize your life, but that's kind of how things work themselves out. It was like, this is my number one priority. Working in music was my number one priority. Becoming better at the skills I wanted to become better at were my number one priority. So if that meant that at one point, I feel like at one point I was in school, I was working full time. I was in grad school getting my master's in data science. I was also planning my wedding. And there was a bit of time in which I was also planning to move to a different country, kind of all at the same time, and we just made that work. Basically, there was always like this idea that there was really no other option, so when you feel like there's really no other option, then you have to make it work, right?
Because like one of the things I notice when I do sort of talks with people who are maybe going to school, like for music business, or they're artists or whatever, and especially people who are trying to get into the music industry to get a job at a record label, I find that a lot of them just they don't feel very confident about it being possible in a way. And I think to myself, well, yeah, but it's like you're saying you can't. There can't be an option B in a way. What do you have any advice for those people who?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, and I talk to a lot of students and a lot of young people that are looking to get in the industry, or people that are looking to like career change. And I think a lot of times it can be an industry that feels like it's very exclusive, very elitist, like it's kind of leaving people out. And I understand that, and I feel that. I know how hard that is. I think a lot of times the reason why people feel left out is because their viewpoint of the music industry is very limited. So essentially, people think, hey, if I don't work at a major label, if I don't work at YouTube, I'm not working in the music industry. And they fail to realize that there is a whole lot of the music industry. Basically, it doesn't even matter, for the most part, no matter how big or small your town is, even within an hour, there's a music venue. There is a music venue somewhere that books some shows. You can call them up at any point in time, within 2 hours, or there's a newspaper. there's a newspaper and there's a music column in that newspaper. I almost can guarantee you there's a music column in whatever newspaper it is, and however big or small your town is. Within an hour, there is a radio station. At least one radio station exists in your town, no matter what town it is. And I think people lose sight of the fact that the music industry exists not just in New York, in LA, in London. It exists all over. So I think that's a component of it. And I think a lot of times people think, oh, major label is the music industry and nothing else is the music industry. And I think once you get out of that mindset of there's only one part of the music industry that I can possibly work in, then it gives you a lot more opportunity to think, hey, there's actually a lot out there that I can do. And especially in those smaller towns, oh gosh, the help they need. They need lots of help. They would love to have you knock on their door. I got my first job, like I said, my first full-time job, I worked at part-time while I was in school. It was a live music startup that was like a competitor, Ticketmaster essentially. I literally sent them an email and said, hey, I think your company is really cool. Can I do anything for you? That was the email. It was probably a little bit longer than that, but it was not much longer because I was, 19. But that's how the email went. And eventually they were my first full-time employer, but people weren't knocking on the door because everyone was trying to go to DC or New York or whatever instead, essentially.
Because I think that's sort of an interesting point that a lot of the time people think, oh, well, no one needs my help, or that everything's already completed. Do you know what I mean? That there's not, and the idea that, people do need help is a good way. I never even thought to look at it that way. This idea that, oh, get in touch with someone because not everything is going great all the time for everyone, and that there's always room for improvement. That's a super good piece of advice, because I think even if I think the way I starting at a small indie run label, they totally needed lots of help, and so okay, so that's an amazing piece of advice. But I think I want to move on to what I sort of thought we should talk about the whole time, but there's actually too much to talk about. So, but this idea of what you do in your job around data and stuff. So we did a panel together, a metadata panel in Toronto. When was that? Earlier in the year, I can't remember what. And I think that was pretty nerdy. And it was maybe a little too complex for people who are newer artists or newer managers. And when I think about those, you're an expert in that. I've worked in music for quite a long time. And I think to myself, in something we talk about together as a company, it's back to this idea, where would you start when people say, oh, you need to get track of analytics or data or whatever? And I don't think a lot of people know where to start. So what I was hoping we could do was sort of dial it back to zero and say, okay, I'm a new artist or I'm a new manager. How do I get going in building up a system? What should I pay attention to? Knowing that everybody says, oh, well, pay attention to socials, pay attention to streaming, pay attention to this. But what's the best thing? How the hell should they start is basically my question.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. There is a lot. There's continuously a lot. And I think people kind of get overwhelmed by the fact that there's so many places that you could be looking. So I think the first thing to do is kind of think about what actually has worked for you. You as an artist or manager probably intuitively know some of those things. You don't need the data to tell you. And then experiment a bit. So let's start with just something really simple. Let's say Spotify is your strongest platform, right? You're like, okay, I get the most streams on Spotify. It's fantastic, okay. And then the other part of it is what's your strongest social platform? Is it TikTok? Is it Twitter? Is it, Facebook? Is it Instagram, et cetera, whatever, right? Cool, all right. So if you establish that, let's say Spotify is your strongest platform and Instagram is your strongest social media site, then every time you post on Instagram about your music, look what happens on Spotify. Does it increase? Does it increase by a lot? Does it increase by a little? You don't need to know numbers. You don't need percentages. You don't need all these other things. Literally, there's one graph go up and the other graph up at the same time, or does it not? If one goes up and the other one goes up, do more of that thing. If one goes up and the other one doesn't go up, maybe try something else instead, right? And like little things like that where you're continuously kind of experimenting and looking at your numbers, but not in a way where you have to like do calculations, literally just like, are things going up or down, et cetera, and have a look continuously. The other thing to think about is, and very similar to how people are continuously thinking about the music industry from a point of like major label. I think sometimes artists and managers always think about success from the standpoint of streams, especially when you're talking about pop and hip hop, for example, always thinking streams. But is that really what you need? There are plenty of artists that are making great money with Patreons, for example. There are plenty of artists that are making great money with Discord channels. There are plenty of artists doing things that aren't necessarily coming directly from streams. There's e-commerce, there's merch, there's live, there's things like even like Cameo. Like there's so many different things in places where you can develop revenue. So I think another thing is to kind of diversify or think about where your revenue is coming from and if it necessarily has to be from streaming. And then from there is also thinking about cultivating your audience. I think a lot of times people think they need to be everywhere when you don't. You need to be where your audience is or where the audience you want is, essentially. If your audience is not on TikTok, why are you there? Why are you spending your time there? It's not the place you need to be, essentially. So think about where your audience is, and like how to find your audience. A few different ways to kind of tackle that, really. One way is to look at things like who's making third-party playlists on Spotify and putting you into it. For example, you hop on Spotify Analytics, click on your playlist, you can see what playlist was I added to, check out who that person is. Sometimes they have an Instagram handle in their bio or like in the playlist name, things like that, for example. Also, again, very intuitively, like who is talking to you, who is continuously commenting, who is continually talking with you on Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. That's your core audience. You want more of those. You need a lot of those people. Those are the people that make you the most money. Those are the people that stream you the most, et cetera. And actually focus on them and be where they are. Click on their profiles and see what else they're talking about, because sometimes they're not talking about you. And what else are they talking about when they're not talking about you? That's where you need to be. If that's magazines, if that's press, if that's websites, if that's Reddit, I don't know, wherever they are, you should be where they are, when they're not talking about you, where they're talking about is where you need to be. And again, all of these are data points in various different ways. I think people get stuck on like, yeah, streams. How do I get more streams? When there's a lot of different ways to kind of approach it and a lot of different ways to kind of tackle it. Because if you cultivate those 10 super fans and you put out a vinyl or you put out a t-shirt, you're going to make way more money from your $20 vinyl or t-shirt from those 10 super fans than you're going to make from 10 new people streaming your song once. So think about things much more strategically when it comes to how you approach things. I think will help out a lot in your thought process and even like how to handle your quote just data.
So like it's interesting you mentioned you don't necessarily you don't need to be everywhere. I think you said, like, because I think that I sense is a problem for a lot of people. It's like, okay, there are all these platforms. Is your advice that should you be on them all somehow on a base level and then focus on the ones where you feel most comfortable and bring you the most results?
You should definitely get your username everywhere, because you don't want someone else having your username. But to be honest, I don't think you need to spend all of your time. I don't think you need to put any effort into some platforms. If you're like, oh, I really should have a presence there. If you really, really feel strongly about it, you should have, again, those core fans. Think about creating a street team. Street teams aren't really a thing anymore, and I don't know why, because they're very, very, very important. But think about some other way where you can have a presence on a channel where it doesn't necessarily have to be you, because you will stretch yourself thin. I think a lot of people, I don't think they all became artists just so they can post continuously on Instagram. I don't think that's why people became artists. Maybe some of them did, but like for the most part, think about how much, like basically, I think about how much you can maximize doing the thing that you're good at doing rather than doing the thing that you have to do. And that's how you should really approach things. So you don't really need to be on all the platforms all the time, posting continuously. Be on the ones that matter, and then basically just ignore the rest. When it comes to distribution of music, that's different. Your music should be literally as every single place as possible to be on. But when it comes to things like socials, like save yourself the trouble. You don't need to be everywhere.
Okay, so this street team thing, because we're both from North America, I get the impression that street teams weren't as popular in other places, such as the UK. So for people that don't know, because I think you're onto something, basically, this idea, like, what would a street team do today, would you think, for example?
Yeah, I mean, a street team would do the same thing a street team used to do, probably just more on the internet. But like when I ran street teams, we had, posters and flyers and stickers to pass out after gigs and things like that. We were always talking about the artists. I had like other street teamers that were working with me and things like that. But those are also the people that would like call up the radio stations or request the songs, for example. Like this is like an army of people. It doesn't have to be a large army of people, but it's an army of people that are continuously talking about you. The bigger, the better it is. So I don't think artists think about that anymore. And I find it fascinating because it's like these are people willing to work for you for free. I mean, when I was a kid, I got free show tickets, obviously, which would cost much more money than the actual amount of money they would pay me at that point anyway. I'm not saying you should work for free, always get something. But when it comes to it, they are the ones that will do things on your behalf, potentially at a scale that you couldn't do on your own if you didn't have the support, essentially. So that is like, creating those Spotify playlists is like the 2021 equivalent of calling a bunch of radio stations, right? That is, posting on socials, talking about your new release, things like that. Also, like artists don't like, I guess Kanye's doing it again now, but artists don't really have listening parties anymore. And like bringing your biggest fans to your IRL listening party or even your virtual one, that's another thing where they're going to talk about all over socials and it doesn't cost you much of anything really. All these different ways where you can like embrace the fact that you have an audience, no matter how big or small that audience is, and use that to amplify yourself X amount of times is really what it comes down to. And I don't think people are using their audience in a way that's most effective anymore.
So I've had one person, Felicia, who said, anybody, if you've got questions, throw them in the chat. So Felicia, I love it. I was on many a street team as a teenager. And then my friend Katanya, she says she works with BTS. And she's saying that they have a super strong street team called the Army, who I've never heard of. Are you all G'd up on the Army?
I know the BTS Army. Oh, yes.
But that's amazing. I didn't even think of that at all. But then the other thing that when we were talking last week that I thought was super interesting, talk about because I love email, but I think people think email is pretty uncool these days. And you don't think that way, do you? You think like me, right? You think email's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, a good thing in moderation. But really, when it comes down to it, the reason why email is important is because it is platform agnostic. What is not platform agnostic? Basically everything else. So I always put it in the context of, so I worked at Universal for a few years. Universal owns Deutsche Grammophon, right? Deutsche Grammophon is arguably the oldest record label in the world, technically. They've been around for approximately 150 years. Spotify has been around for approximately 12 at this point, meaning Spotify could live for a long time, it could not, etc. But the label's been around 10x amount of times. Music has been around much, much, much longer. So you have to make sure you cultivate your audience in a place where you can move them with you. If you do not, the second MySpace stops being cool, all of a sudden the million followers you had on that platform does not matter. And so you should always have the email addresses of your fans and your audience so that when the next Spotify or the next TikTok or the next Instagram comes along, you can send them an actual email and say, hey, I'm over here now, and they know where to find you. Otherwise, the second that platform stops being cool, you lose your audience.
Did you hear it? Was it last week that they were talking about how Spotify have announced something for podcasters that they can contact their audience directly?
I have not. That's quite interesting. The problem with that is there's still a middleman of Spotify there, which is really great, but there's still a middleman there.
Because I think that's always been the big frustration with Spotify. Is that correct? That you can do all these things with Spotify, but you don't really know who your fans are. You're getting it through the Spotify's filter or whatever. And is email the only way around that, do you think? Or do you have any other ideas of, because that's it seems to me like a good strategy. Like whatever I've got, I need to be able to take it with me. Like, so do you have any other advice around that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it depends. If your audience is heavily in one country, it's a little bit easier for this one, but SMS is actually still a thing and you can still use it. So if you actually have the phone numbers of your audience, for example, that's another means to kind of go about it so you can contact them. Those are the only two that I can really think of where you could actually, that are platform agnostic. Everything else is generally lives somewhere else that may or may not exist in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, basically.
Huh. Because I know last month, it was this guy named Bruno from TuneCore in Brazil. And they're, like, I hear all the time in South America, it's all about WhatsApp.
WhatsApp.
You know what I mean? Like, and it's crazy. And so the SMS thing is interesting. It's like, I would never think to do that living in Sweden or whatever, but it makes complete sense that in certain places, but how would you contact people as a small artist, mass SMS?
Yeah, I mean, so as a small artist, your SMS list probably wouldn't be very big anyway,
Yeah.
It's a small artist. But there are plenty of platforms that allow you to send SMS in the same way, how email platforms like MailChimp, Emma, et cetera, allow you to email at scale. There are platforms that allow you to send SMS messages at scale. The reason why I said if you're very country specific, it's a little bit easier because some of the providers are like, oh, we send to all the US main email addresses and things like that. WhatsApp is really great, but you have to have a separate app. And again, that's no longer platform agnostic to a certain extent with WhatsApp, and it's better because it's a phone number. But for example, with me, my WhatsApp number is not the same number as my my main UK number at this point because my WhatsApp number is from the US. Things like that. WhatsApp is not the same as like I own a phone and I can call you. That's like the most agnostic of a platform, but WhatsApp is a good option, definitely, but not everyone will have it, basically.
Okay. So say I do all these things that you're talking about, and I sort of get going. I'm an artist or I'm a manager, and then like help me connect all these things to say to what you do now working at Warner. Like, how is it just more of the same, but in a lot more detail, or do sort of, I think my question I'm getting at is like, can I do everything myself as an artist if I have more and more and more success and access to smart people to help me? Or do I need to be in that major label environment? Because you mentioned it's an interesting thing with jobs that someone thinks, oh, well, the music business are the majors and that's the most important thing and everybody else is outside that. Because you've done tons of different jobs, how do you see those worlds?
Yeah.
Especially for artists.
Yeah, I would say you don't need a label to be an artist. What labels allow you to do goes back to what I was previously saying. Labels allow you to just do the thing you want to do, as opposed to do all the other things you don't want to do. But if you have a really strong, solid team behind you, you can do it. I think the issue that you run into with not being on a major label is two things. It's export. It's often much more challenging to get out of your own country, especially if you're trying to break into the US without a label. And then additionally, it's access. So a major label can call up Spotify at fairly fairly easily, essentially. I mean, like me, I don't call Spotify, but someone, if I need something, I know the person that I talk to that calls up Spotify. You know, like, and as an indie artist, you might not have that, but if you have the right team behind you, you might have that support. So I think about AIM, for example, in the UK, is for independent artists, and they can call up Spotify. So like that's a way to help you out. And then if you have the right distributor, you have a TuneCore or CD Baby or things like that, they'll help out if you're like, hey, my song's not where it's supposed to be, or someone put a copy of my song up or things like that. But again, you have to kind of like piece this all together yourself. So if you have an excellent manager that will help you piece it all together, so you're not doing that too, I think it's definitely doable. But as an artist, the problem is it chips away at your time to create music. And most people did not go into music to be their own lawyer and their own finance person and their own marketer and their own everything else too. And if you did, more power to you, because you're probably keeping a whole lot of your money. But it's definitely not the easiest thing to do, certainly.
So then, like, I think how I heard about you was via a Measure of Music. But I've never been able to, we've never had the time for me to ask you, like, how, so you're working all day long at Warner, and then we were talking, it was a bank holiday in the UK yesterday, but you were getting caught up on emails. But then you've got this other thing on the side. So explain what Measure of Music is first, and then I want to talk about why you're doing that in contrast to, say, your job. So what is Measure of Music exactly?
Yeah, so Measure of Music is a part hackathon, part workshop, part conference, essentially. I put it on for the first time in February of this year, which seems like approximately 1 million years ago. So it's fascinating that was only like 7 months ago. But yeah, I put it together, and it was a way for people to easily understand or get an understanding of music tech and music data in a way that highlights it in the way it works within the rest of the industry as a whole, rather than highlighting, oh, you can, you need to learn how to code. It's more like, hey, how does the marketers use data? How do the digital service providers like Spotify use data? How does HR and music use data? Essentially, is talking about like how data is used in different ways. Part of it was a conference. We had panelists, we had speakers, but it was also a hackathon where people were given music data or had the access to music data, and they created projects that had something to do with music and data, but not necessarily just music and data. So some people did artist reports, for example. Some people created apps, for example. It was a really interesting mix of what people put together, but they had approximately 48 hours and a team of between 4 to 6 people to put together a project that they presented to a team of esteemed judges, including Mark, after 48 hours of putting it together. It was very cool. And we had 1,000 people or so watch the panelists and the presentations. And then we had 70 plus people actually participate in the actual hackathon component of it. And these are people, some of them had never touched data in their lives, and some people came in having a lot of data experience. So it was a really interesting mix of people. Yeah.
And why on earth would you need another big project like that to do?
A super great question. I am obviously a glutton for punishment, the only obvious answer there. But really, what happened is during the pandemic, I had a lot of people reach out to me that were looking for roles, that were graduating from school and were like, oh, this is the worst case scenario, etc. And I love talking with them. I actually set aside time on my calendar to talk to people twice a week. I've done it for most of the pandemic. And my calendar was always full 4 to 6 weeks in advance. And I was like, oh, I want to be able to help more, but I don't have the time. So I was like, okay, well, if I just put together an event where I just have all the companies I was talking about to people anyway speak about it, then it won't have to be me all the time. So I was like, okay, cool. I'll call up my friends at Spotify and Chartmetric and just put them all together, and they'll talk about all their data and how you get roles and all kinds of fun stuff instead. And so I started it off, and I was like, oh yeah, maybe like 50 people will sign up. It'll be super chill. And like maybe we'll have like 3 speakers. 50 people signed up in the first, I want to say it was within the first few hours. I filled up every spot and I was like, okay, well, I guess we should scale this out a bit. And so instead of it being like literally a couple of speakers in a single day, it ended up being a 3-day long conference. I had never put together a conference before. So, why not? And it worked out really well. I had speakers from like Spotify, TikTok, Warner, Patreon. It's really cool. Like it was a wide array of speakers from all over, which was really great. But that's kind of how it came about, was just like, how can I help as many people as possible? And it worked out. I got a text from one of the women that volunteered. She helped out for the event. She sent me a text today that she just got a job offer from Spotify. A job offer from TikTok. And so she's really excited about that. And I got another person a job at Warner. I have gotten friends jobs. I got people that work through with me at Measure Music jobs. It's a really interesting thing to see it, but that was kind of the catalyst, was just like, how can I help as many people as possible, really?
And how much did it cost to put it on? Because I think this is the ultimate punchline, because you announced it at the end of the event.
Yeah.
Right when you brought your husband out to thank him as well, if I remember correctly.
Yes, I did.
So, yeah. So he gets cost, but how much did it cost to run?
Yeah, so I actually put the entire thing together for $200, like 200 USD. Yeah, USD.
Nice.
Yeah. It was a combination of Zoom and MailChimp, and the fact that I am actually a web developer, fun fact. And I was able to kind of piece it all together with very little resources, essentially, but it worked out with a lot of amazing people that are willing to give up their time for free, is what it came down to for it to be possible. I actually did the calculation of how much it would have cost if everyone was paid for the hours of time they're put into it, and it was like thousands of dollars, basically.
Yeah. Well, because there's a couple people saying here that it's one of the best experiences I've ever had. Great experience. Yeah. Great opportunity to work with people with a variety of different backgrounds. Felt like a community, amazing, because it was a really impressive event. And I think one of the things that I sort of noticed was, I loved it. Afterwards, I'd sort of get requests from people on LinkedIn or whatever, and they all had the green circles open to work or whatever. And what I really liked is that everybody was just there. It seemed like there to be involved, and it didn't really matter how much experience you had. It was more about a willingness to be involved in something. And I think that's quite rare. I think you go to a lot of conferences, or one goes to a lot of conferences and are involved in things, and it's like there's a person here delivering a message to a group of people here listening. And what impressed me about your event was, it wasn't like that. It was loads of different people talking, and I think that's it is very rare in my mind. And I was just like, is that something because again, I think it's like the what you do on LinkedIn or whatever, just naming jobs and stuff. Is it something that you like? It's certainly important to you, but is it something you consciously think of? Or is it just who you are as a person?
Oh gosh, who I am as a person makes me sound like a much nicer person than I actually am, I swear. No one actually describes me as nice. Really? What it comes down to nice is not the word. Really what it comes down to is I love the music industry for better and for many times worse. However, I want the music industry to be full of people that don't suck. Plain and simple. I know it seems like it's really, really selfish for me, but I just want it to be full of people that don't suck. And so really, when it comes down to helping other people, it's very selfish still, because I just want to be surrounded by smart people that don't suck. And so people that are really passionate and really excited about the music industry should be working in the music industry. I know so many people that are very disillusioned by the music industry that have given up. And I don't want that, because there are plenty of people in the music industry that are jaded and do not need to be there anymore. So why not figure out a way to help the people that want to be there? In addition, it's an industry where it is still very, very it's lacking diversity in a lot of ways, especially in the senior positions. And so when I put together Measure of Music, the participants in the hackathon, as well as the speakers, were majority minority for both gender and race on purpose, but not manufactured. Essentially, it's because that's what my network looks like. That's what the people that reached out to me look like, and that's how I end up getting put together. And all of that's really quite important to me, because not only do I want to have a music industry full of people that do not suck, I also want to have a music industry where people look like me, where people don't look like me. I want a combination of that. And right now, when you look around, especially as you get more senior in the music industry, it's not what you see. And that's what's really important to me. But again, very selfish. I just want to be surrounded by great people. And if I can help be surrounded by great people, that's really all that matters.
That, because I remember you talking at the end of the event about how the makeup of the audience and the participants and all that kind of stuff. And I noticed that comes up a lot, like sort of when we talk about, different things that you're involved in. And so I wanted to talk a bit about that, because what is the organization you're part of at Warner? You're involved in, what's the name of that? The group, the Employee Resource Group.
I'm a co-lead of the employee resource group called The Link at Warner Music, and it is for employees of color and allies within Warner Music Group. Yeah.
Okay, and so explain how long that's been around.
So it's been around for about 3 or 4 years now, and I've been one of the co-leads for the last year or so, a year and some change at this point. Yeah.
And what would that organization be doing exactly inside Warner?
So yeah, we do a bit of everything. So we put together a mentorship program, so an interim mentorship program within our members, for example, which was really quite great, because we had the mentors were people that were, heads of A&R. One of the mentors is actually now running Warner Music UK. So that's Warner Records UK, so that's pretty cool. We also do reverse mentoring, where we talk to the UK frontline label heads, and we talk to them about about diversity and inclusion issues as well. We also basically act as like a little lobbying group for our senior management team to say, hey, this is what we want, this is what we're after, this is what we want to see more of. We also bring in speakers. We brought in speakers like Kanya from the Mobos, for those in the UK who know the Mobos well. We brought speakers in from various parts of the UK entertainment and music industry to speak to the group as well. So it's a little bit of everything, but it's really just kind of show increasing representation and making sure that the conversation continuously happening to ensure that, again, very selfishly, the place that I work at is a better place to work at.
But like when we were talking last week, you had mentioned something that I thought was quite interesting. And before we come to that, I'm curious, like, what are some of the things that are important to that group within a company? It doesn't need to be specific to Warner, because I'm almost certain that this is the same everywhere. But what are those issues that you, as an organization, would want to be pushing forward? Like, what are the things that you being on that team feel need to change?
Yeah, and this is very much an industry as a whole thing, but representation is incredibly important. If you look up, or if you look to the right or your left, you see no one that looks like you, see no one that has a background like you see no one that has an experience like you, it's challenging to see yourself higher up in the industry. We've had a lot of conversations about like the ethnicity and gender pay gap to make sure that there's a visibility so that we could work on improving that, for example. We've had conversations about genre and how to become a label president, for example, or to be high up in a major label without having a pop background, with having a hip hop background, with having a dance background even. It's the idea of basically cross-genre training so that people are more well-rounded. Because if you say, hey, we expect you to be this, this, and this in order to get here, but you don't train people to have this, this, and this, then what's the expectation? And so we have a lot of conversation about that, also about career coaching to make sure people feel like they have guidance and support within their career. And then, of course, just building a sense of community so that when people start in the company, we have one of our initiatives is called Random Pairings. Literally every one Friday a month during lunchtime, we pair people up together randomly just so they can meet new people. Yeah, it's a bit of everything, really.
But can we talk about that, about the cross-genre training? And but specifically, when you were telling me about that, I was fascinated. So explain the core idea around that, the core problem. I think you were saying that it's that to move, if you look at the data, as in certain people who do certain jobs come from certain types of backgrounds musically, is that correct?
Yeah.
Can you explain that for everyone?
Of course. So generally, if you look at the backgrounds of most of the people that run frontline labels, so that would be label heads, for example, most of them come from an A&R background. A&R is very popular for those that reach out to me and want to talk about it. It's very popular. A lot of people want to work in A&R. And so that's great. It makes sense from a lot of ways why you would come from an A&R background and end up as a label president. I would argue that there are plenty of other jobs within a major label that could also run a label, but we'll get to that later. But when it comes down to it, one of the issues is a lot of the label presidents, as I'm sure many people have noticed, are all white men. There's some exceptions, but very few and far between. And a lot of those people have backgrounds in pop music. So they would say, oh, this is the person that signed blank, an Ed Sheeran or Bruno Mars, or whatever it might be, which is great. However, a lot of our Black employees at many of the major labels tend to have a background in hip hop, rap, R&B, and other traditionally Black music. What we run into is when it comes to the point of that person, a Black employee being, at an SVP level or a VP level, and they want to be that label president, all of a sudden they're essentially told, oh, you don't have pop music experience. However, no one ever trained them on pop music experience. No one ever gave them the opportunity to work pop music. No one told them that they needed to work pop music in order to become a label president. And then when they want to become a label president, all of a sudden they need pop music experience. Therefore, it seems really that anyone that has aspirations to be a label president, or anyone that's working really in any genre of music, should have exposure and experience in other genres of music if they want to, so that when the time comes, if they want to progress in a direction that is more broad and more general, they have that experience and they have no barrier in their way to becoming that label president or becoming that label head, because they have the various levels of experience. If you never give anyone an opportunity to work in a different genre, and then you say they must have that genre, then really it's the fault of the company, not the fault of the person.
And then, so say we can take any of the major labels. So is there a lack of diversity with people coming into a company like Warner?
No.
So it is, so the people coming into the companies is more diverse, but they don't, it becomes, so the problem is that the diversity of the employees decreases over as people move up. Is that?
Very much so. There's plenty of studies out there. One of my favorite in the UK is the UK music diversity study done by UK Music. And it shows that there is a proper amount of representation at the lower quartile across the music industry in the UK, for example. But you see that drop off as you increase further up. So as you get to, director level, senior director level, VP, SVP up, that's where you start seeing the diversity from a race and ethnicity standpoint, essentially. So a lot of times you'll see companies, many companies that will say, oh, we're going to hire more from HBCUs. For those in the US, though, those are historically Black universities and colleges. They'll say we're going to hire more from there to get more interns in, more entry-level people in. But we have plenty. That's not where the issue is. It's more of the promoting internally, for example, retention within the company, and then bringing in people at the level that they deserve to be at when they come into the company. And that's where we see that drop off, and we see people dropping out of the industry system to go elsewhere, is at the mid to senior levels.
And do you see that as something that these companies are aware of? Or do you feel that, say for that organization at Warner, that even getting senior management to understand that that's where the problem is? Or do you see what I mean? Like, where do you think we are with that challenge?
Yeah, I think it's becoming more apparent, and I think it's becoming a louder problem that it can't be ignored, essentially. I think the issue is people don't know what to do about it. And to be honest, some people are probably afraid of what the solutions might be to how to go about it as well. But I think it sounds really good to say you're going to bring in more diverse interns, when no one thinks about the fact that, hey, but what are you doing about your actual already existing employees, for example? And I think there's an acknowledgement that that's an issue at this point, but I don't think anyone's really figured out what the solution should be yet. And I think that puts us at a bit of a standstill, because I think that's the harder part, really, is figuring out that part, of course.
But then I remember, again, when we were talking last week, we were also talking about how, a lot of people say, and this is ridiculous, but a lot of people say, like, how do you broaden your network in general? So not necessarily just diversity, but getting that, like you talk about with Measure of Music, this idea that it wasn't necessarily on purpose, but your network is so broad and has different types of people. And so I think a lot of us work in smaller companies, or we live in certain bubbles, or we don't know certain people who do different jobs. And, back to even that thing at the start about looking for jobs and networking and stuff, like how have you been so successful at broadening your network in that way? Like, what do you, so for advice for other people, do you think about it consciously and actively do things, or is it just naturally you're drawn to meeting different people? Like, what do you think people should do if they want to expand their network, be that diverse, different countries, different genres, different levels of people? What's your take on all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think really it comes down to you have to want to, when it comes down to it. I'm not saying you have to manufacture it, but you have to just want to. And not a lot of people like being uncomfortable, which is understandable. Who wants to be uncomfortable? But sometimes you have to be uncomfortable in order to be in a space that you've never been in before. I think one thing that's especially challenging but something that you're used to as a person of color, especially if you're a person of color that grew up in an area that you are not the majority, is that you are continuously the minority. So I've written some pieces about this, but essentially when I grew up, I had to have a full understanding of Black culture, and I also had to have a full understanding of not Black culture in order to survive through my day-to-day. The opposite doesn't exist for most people. The opposite doesn't exist for a lot of people. And so if you need to understand a different culture, you have to actively step out of that. Like I said, a label president can have a very long history in pop music and never worked hip hop or rap or R&B and be completely fine, but it doesn't work the other way around, for example. And so really you have to be uncomfortable and put yourself in situations and put yourself in places where you would not normally be. I don't think there's any other way around it, because you can't, if you go to the places you always go, you're going to meet the people you've always met, plain and simple. So if you want to meet new people and have new experiences, you have to try new things. You have to talk to new people. You have to reach out to new people. If you're not willing to do that, you're going to always meet the people you've always met, which is a very comfortable life, but it's probably not the way you're going to have diverse opinions and voices around you.
So someone here, Andak, said, I can answer this question on behalf of Christine. Last year, I followed and sent messages to many people from major labels, and Christine was the only one who replied back. Wow. Does anybody have any questions here? There
are so many questions. I wish I could answer them all, guys. I'm so sorry.
Do you want to take, are you getting any DMs? Are there a couple that you want to take? Why don't we take some questions?
So many. I think the first question that came in, I can answer. Someone's asked, how did I know how to get into the music industry when I was really young? And again, it came down to really I think I literally at this point, like again, I'm gonna date myself, but I think I had like a Craigslist search of like music, and anytime any job anywhere mentioned music, I would find it and reach out, etc. Like all times on LinkedIn, you can have a search of music at all times. On Twitter, etc. Like I continuously have this idea. I also listen to a lot of podcasts still. There's plenty of podcasts I also listen to understand the music industry. Do yourself a favor if you're gonna reach out to people on LinkedIn before you reach out to them. Do a Google, listen to some stuff they've talked about. Before my last time I was interviewing for a job, I reached out to the person that was previously in the role. And before I reached out to him, I listened to a podcast he was on, for example. Like there's a lot of different ways to learn about the music industry that doesn't require you to just reach out to people. There's lots of ways to consume that. Someone else asks about how to work with a label, but also stay authentic. Again, at the end of the day, it's your brand. You can put your foot down as much as you want. You can say, oh, I'm not going to do this, or I'm going to do this, as long as you, you really don't have to, but like you should justify your actions. But if you can justify your actions why you want to or will not want to do something, the labels will actually work with you. I think sometimes labels get a bad rap. People are like, oh, they're going to tell me what to do, and they're going to make me something I'm not. For the most part, they can't. I always joke, and it's quite true when people are like, oh, do you use data to tell artists what type of music to make? I'm like, no artist at any time is going to listen to me if I told them what data to, like if I said, a perfect pop song is 115 beats per minute, artists would scoff at me and go back to what they were doing. So like, we don't dictate to artists what they want, what they should or should not do, or we don't tell them what they have to do. We just give suggestions. So if you don't want to do the suggestion when you're working with a label, you have that choice. And if you don't have that choice, that's not the label you want to work with long term. So you should figure something else out there. But like you should have that choice at all times. Someone asked about the key music data. Spotify API is fantastic. It's free and easy to use and learn. It's how I learned Python is using the Spotify API, for example. Chartmetric has great data. It is more of a UI. They have an API that you can also use, but they have a UI for Chartmetric that I love. Spotify charts is readily available. Last.fm has some really cool data as well. There are tons and tons of places. Genius has a really cool API. Tons of places. Think about what type of data you want to play around with and go from there rather than the other way around, because you could be looking all day, but there's so many different options when it comes to data. Someone else reached out. Yes, feel free to connect with me. I'm someone, hopefully maybe Jamie can drop my LinkedIn in, but definitely feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I will accept it. Feel free to send me a message. I do reply back. It might take a while, but I do reply back. I do not review new music. Sorry.
I saw that. Aren't there any local papers that need your help?
Like, if I only had the time. I used to. I read a magazine at one point. I didn't even mention that. I read a magazine. It was a blast.
Oh, right.
I did review music back then. Yeah. How is pop music more desired? So yes, hip hop is the most popular genre in the world. Pop music is much more desired because pop music has always been the much more desired, essentially. So that is much more of a situation that's how it's always been, and that's why things go that way. But yes, hip hop overall is the biggest genre in the world, but not necessarily the biggest genre in every country. So that's another component to think about. Pop music absolutely thrives in places like the Nordics, for example, and hip hop is very much a struggle, especially hip hop not by white rappers. Whole other conversation, but that's something to keep in mind as well, that the world is more than just the US and the UK. What else? How do you turn data into revenue? Know your audience, get your audience to spend money on things. That's basically the easiest way to turn data into revenue. If your audience likes to buy merch, make some merch. If your audience likes to go to shows, book some shows. If your audience is a streaming audience, you better put out a whole lot of music and hope they stream it a bunch. But really, it's just know what your audience likes and do that thing.
But that's a very, very, very good way of explaining it. That we could spend a half hour saying, how can you turn your data into revenue? And basically what you're saying is, well, listen to what people tell you and then react to what they're telling you.
Yeah, so that's how most of life works, to be honest, if you think about it. just go on a higher level there. Most of life works is like listen to what people are telling you and do the thing. It's kind of like when people reach out to me like, oh man, how do I get a job doing this thing? I always tell them, look for a job description that tells you what to do for that job, and then do the thing that the job description says. Like,
but some of it, you know, like that's what I like about you. You make everything sound so easy, and I think it is important. I think that's important because ultimately you can accomplish things if you just try to do it, right? So if everybody thought everything's too hard, they'd never give it a go. And I think you're very good at articulating, oh yeah, you just do this and you do that. And it's like the timeline is way longer, way longer, but the end result can't still be the same. So I really like, I think, you know, I love the way you summarize everything. Are there any last questions in there before we go?
Someone, Jordan, asks, what will you do to be less guilty of elitism? I don't know if that meant me or the industry as a whole. But for me, I always talk to everyone. I think sometimes when people are on like LinkedIn, they'll reach out to every VP they can find at a company. And I'm like, you can just reach out to the coordinators. They probably have way more time. And so reach out to the coordinators and the assistants and the marketing managers rather than reaching out to the VPs and the SVPs, because I will say I am not at a VP or SVP, and my inbox is quite full on LinkedIn. So I cannot imagine what those people at more high-level roles inboxes look like. So consider reaching out to people younger, and I always am willing to talk to people younger. That's how I help combat it. And then from like a whole industry standpoint, I do not know how the whole industry is planning on combating things. I think Monica mentioned about they're hiring a lot more people in diversity and inclusion roles. I will say as a PSA that Black people and queer people can do other jobs in the music industry besides being head of diversity. But I do not think the music industry has gotten that memo yet. So hopefully in a few more years, they will figure that out. But hopefully there will be some good change that happens with those hires that involve those people being in other roles besides just head of diversity roles, essentially. What about the long tail? Someone asked about other genres. Oh gosh, please go into other genres. I would love to see people go into other genres. There's more than just pop and hip hop and dance music in the world. Jazz, neoclassical is a huge genre. There's some really fun stuff that can happen. There's like sync. Monica mentioned about sync. Sync, huge for neoclassical, for example. Like definitely other genres are great. Please pursue them. Any opportunity for data science in Africa? There is plenty. All major labels have a presence in Nigeria, for example. Warner Music owns Chocolate City in Nigeria, for example. There are plenty of opportunities in South Africa as well. Once you get outside of Nigeria and South Africa, it gets a bit more dicey, but Triller has a really strong presence down there, as well as like Boomplay, for example. Very much lots of opportunities. Definitely, you should. Once you get more familiar with the industry, you'll figure out what those companies are.
Check out Meet 'em Africa for network too.
Great call.
There you go.
I think that's everything. Anyone else? Anything else? My poor husband wants to eat dinner soon, so I can only do a couple more minutes. It's okay.
May I ask, super important, what is your husband's name? Because he's always referred to as your husband. So I think it's time to...
Husband's name is John.
Always off camera.
Yeah.
Always off camera.
He's much more of an off-camera person than I am. But husband's name is John. He works at AWS. We overlap in the fact that we both understand how to code in different languages. But that is why he was very helpful in Measure of Music. He helped a lot of people work on their APIs. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, well, maybe we should stop while the chat slows down for fear of being here for so John can eat.
Yes.
Well, look, I wanted to thank you so much for talking. It was super nice because we have done a couple of things together, but I don't feel like I've been able to properly get to know you. So it's been really nice to chat. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me. Jamie, thanks for being amazing as always. Your coordination is impeccable. And Mark, thank you for having me. It's been a blast. Thank you, everyone, for all of the questions. I'm sure I missed many of them. I'm so sorry. Feel free to reach out. I will get back to you as soon as I can. And thanks for the time and listening to me talk for so long.
It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. It was only an hour. We could go another hour at least, I'm sure.
Thanks, guys. All right. Have a good night, day, week, whatever. Bye-bye.
All right, I'll be saying goodbye to everyone. I'll wave everybody off. We'll see you all later. Thanks so much. It's so nice when people wave back. Bye. Bye.